Okay, let's dive right into this. If you're a UPSC aspirant, you know the exam you're preparing for is just the tip of the iceberg. The institution itself, the civil services, has this incredible, deep history that literally shaped modern India. So in this explainer, we are going to trace that journey, from the very first demands for reform all the way to the birth of the UPSC as we know it today. So how was it built? How was this steel frame of the nation's administration actually forged? This wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a long, hard-fought process that stretched over decades, a real tug-of-war of demands, resistance, and eventually some truly landmark reforms. Let's break down this crucial piece of history. Here's how we're going to tackle it. We'll start with that initial spark, the very first calls for change. Then we'll move into an era of official committees. After that, we'll hit the pivotal turning point in 1919. And finally, we'll see how the modern commission we're all familiar with was forged. Right, so our story really kicks off in the late 19th century. The formation of the Indian National Congress back in 1885, that was a huge moment. It marks the beginning of an organized, unified push for some major reforms within the civil services. The demands from the brand new INC were actually super clear and focused on two really fundamental issues. First, they wanted to reverse the lowering of the age limit for the exams. They saw it for what it was, a barrier designed to make it way harder for Indians to even compete. And second, and this was the big one, they demanded that the civil service exams be held in India at the exact same time as they were in Britain. This was all about giving Indians a fair shot without having to face the insane cost and difficulty of traveling all the way to London. So, what was the British response? Well, it wasn't a straightforward yes or no. Instead, what we got was an era of commissions and committees. Their job was to study the issues and make recommendations. But as we're about to see, what they recommended didn't always line up with what Indians were asking for. Let's just take a look at the Aitchison Committee of 1886. The INC wanted simultaneous exams, right? Well, the committee came back and said, nope, exams for the top-tier imperial and civil service would be held in England only. Instead of giving Indians what they wanted, it just restructured the whole system. It got rid of the old covenanted, uncovenanted services and created 3 new tiers in their place. Ultimately, it was a classic bureaucratic shuffle, a step sideways, not a step forward on the core Indian demand for access. And this timeline, wow, it really just puts the whole long struggle into perspective, doesn't it? From that very first committee in 1886, it would take decades of fighting and several key acts of law to finally get to the formation of the UPS in 1950. Let's keep following this path. For a second there, it really looked like there was a breakthrough. In 1893, the British House of Commons actually passed a resolution supporting simultaneous exams. But here's the catch. It was just a resolution. It was never actually put into practice. So Indian aspirants still had to make that incredibly difficult and expensive trip to London to even sit for the exam. A total hollow victory. All of this pressure, all this back and forth, was building up to a true game changer. The Government of India Act of 1919. Honestly, for any aspirant, understanding this act is absolutely critical. It's what finally laid the legal groundwork for so many of the demands that had been shouted for over 30 years. This single act brought about 3 massive changes. First, it legally required that a public service commission must be set up in India to run the exams. Second, it finally sanctioned simultaneous exams in both India and Britain. And third, it created a whole new structure, splitting the services into All India services and Central services. And here is a number that really mattered. The Act specified that at least 1/3 of all recruitment for the higher civil services had to be done right there in India. For the very first time, there was a hard target, a real number aimed at getting more Indians into the administration of their own country. So, what was the result of all this new legislation? Well, in 1922, something historic happened. The very first Indian civil service exam was held on Indian soil. A demand that was first formally made way back in 1885 was, at long last, a reality. But hey, the story doesn't end there. The foundation was laid, but now it was time to actually build the institution. The final phase of this whole evolution involves a few more commissions and acts that would shape the Public Service Commission into what we now recognize as the UPSC. Just 2 years later, in 1924, the Lee Commission came along and added a ton of momentum. It didn't just recommend the Public Service Commission, it demanded its immediate establishment. It also set a seriously ambitious new goal, a 50-50 split between British and Indian officers within 15 years. Plus, it suggested that local, provincial governments should start handling recruitment for subjects like education. And because of that urgent push, the Public Service Commission was officially established in 1926. This was it. This was the direct ancestor of the UPSC, the very first body in India with the official job of conducting civil service exams. The evolution just kept going with the Government of India Act of 1935. This act is so important because it brought in a federal structure. It created a federal public service commission for the central government and set up separate provincial public service commissions for the provinces. I mean, this two-tiered system is the direct blueprint for the exams you might be studying for right now, the UPSC at the national level and the PSCs at the state level. So what you have here is a straight, clear line of evolution. What started as the Public Service Commission in 1926 became the Federal Public Service Commission in 1935, and then finally, with the adoption of the Constitution of India in 1950, it was officially renamed the Union Public Service Commission, the UPSC. This entire journey just shows an institution that was forced to evolve under pressure. It was born from colonial needs, but it was completely reshaped by nationalist demands. And that kind of brings us to a final thought, right? The service was originally designed to rule a colony. So as India continues to charge into the future, how must its steel frame continue to adapt and evolve to truly serve the needs of a 21st century democracy? Something to think about.